My name is Dale Schluntz, and I'm going to be your history professor for this course that you're taking. I wanted to just very briefly introduce myself, as well as explain the concept behind the course, how the course is going to work. Again, my name is Dale Schluntz. I know that's a challenging last name, but I assure you that it gets easier. I have taught for Northwest Vista College, Our Lady Lake University, and I've been a faculty member here at Palo Alto College for about 7 or 8 years now. Love being an educator. It's a great time to be an educator as well. This course may be different than previous courses you have taken, at least prior history courses. Why? Because in here we will memorize nothing. I will not ask you to memorize and regurgitate dates, events on a final exam, anything like that. There's an important reason for this, and it's because one could suggest we do not learn through memorization. Rather, we learn by understanding, through creating meaning from whatever it is that we're examining or discussing. Let me give you a real-world example. Let's say cell phones. Right? Of course, we all probably, if we don't text, we've seen people text, right? We live in a digital era, and that is a primary form of communication. Think about if we can remember the first time we learned how to text, right? If we can recall that, or at least picture it, right? Let's say the first time that we received our smartphone, and you wanted to learn how to text. Wherever you received your smartphone, you probably got a box with it, as well as a manual. Of course, if we were in a face-to-face course, I would ask you by a show of hands, and I can't see your hands, but I'll still pose the question. How many of you, in order to learn how to text, read the manual front to back? And I might have one individual that said, you know, they read the manual, and I applaud you for that. Right? Let me ask another question. How many of you read any part of the manual in order to learn how to text? And typically I might have a couple that read the manual, maybe for another reason. Yet still overwhelmingly, that's not how people learned. So how did we do it? Typically I get two answers. One, of course, is through dialogue and watching other individuals do it. Yet the other is through trial and error. We simply played. We did it. So what is the difference, and why is the latter example more effective? Why? Because if I simply just read the manual to learn how to text, in between the time that I read this and the time that I pick up my phone, in between that, what meaning did I create? Nothing. Because I did not get anything out of it yet. As opposed to if I pick up that phone and I open up that window and I start tapping on icons and then I hit send. What did I just do? I got something out of it. I got something back. In other words, I created meaning. And not only am I much more apt to understand and learn it, but I am much more likely to retain that information long term because it is meaningful. That is why we will not simply just memorize things in this course. Now, of course, do I want you to know, have an idea of what century we're talking about and what period in the century? Yes, if I ask you when the American Revolution occurred and you tell me 2012, right, that's problematic. But am I going to test you on that and ask you to memorize and regurgitate that? Of course not. Right. Perhaps a history example. Let's say 1861. That is when the Civil War began. Of course, there were many events that were leading up to this in the previous half or more century. Yet the official date for the Civil War is 1861. What does that tell you? Well, I will tell you what it tells you. It tells you really nothing. It tells you that it started in 1861, but that's it. It does not tell you why the conflict began, what occurred during the war, and perhaps just as important, if not more, what were the long-term results? What were the consequences? We could ask, what were the consequences for ex-slaves, African Americans, right? And the South as a whole during the period following that, what we refer to as Reconstruction, the Reconstruction era. Perhaps that is something that we can find relatable. And I assure you I won't go on and on, but I'll use this as an example. Before I do that, I'd like to preface it with two questions. One, is the cycle of poverty impossible to break? So for an individual, or perhaps for throughout their lifetime, or perhaps their family for generations, can they get out of poverty? Is it impossible? And I would say most of us would agree it's not impossible. Upward mobility is always challenging, but it's not impossible. The second question is the cycle of poverty challenging to break? Is it difficult? And I would say the majority of us would agree that it truly is. So let's apply that to what we're examining, right? The Reconstruction period in African Americans. Of course, with the close of the Civil War, you have your 13th Amendment, which frees slaves, and that's all it does. Now, that's paramount, that's huge. But the question becomes, well, are we all singing Kumbaya now? Everything's great. Right? And of course, that's not the case. Right? What happens to many of these individuals in the South? Well, let's see what assets they have, what skills and other things. Do they know how to read? Majority do not. Do they know how to write? The majority do not. During the antebellum era, most places in the South made that illegal to teach slaves how to do that. Do they have money? No. Right? Slaves weren't paid. So do they move north? Eventually, many African Americans will move north, but in the period we're discussing, no. Right? And partially because they're not familiar with it, they don't have money, and their skill, they have one skill though that is very, very important. One asset that is huge. They know how to practice agriculture. Unfortunately, what do they lack that they need in order to practice agriculture? Land. You also have another demographic, another group, the landowners, who now, what do they lack? They lack the labor force. Right? And so this sets up a context for an institution that is not new, but it will be perpetuated during this time. Sharecropping. Because it's symbiotic. Both parties need each other. And so these African Americans, and by the way, many poor whites, because most areas in the South following the Civil War and for decades in the future at that point would remain in poverty. Right? So many whites participate in this institution, but it's disadvantageous to the sharecropper themselves. It's called sharecropping. What will happen? These individuals will rent a piece of the landowner's land, grow a crop, and to pay for that rent, they will share. They will split the crop or the harvest or the profit at the end of the year to pay for it. It is disadvantageous to the sharecropper. A couple reasons. Why? And there's several, right? Of course, we go through an economic downturn during this period, but I'll just give you a few. One of them is because in between the time that I first plant my crop and harvest, what does my family still want to do? They still want to eat, right? What do my children, what does my wife need? Medicine, supplies, but I don't have money. And so what do I have to do? I have to borrow, I have to buy things on credit. And what inherently comes with credit? Interest. And so that debt that these individuals, these sharecroppers will accumulate, it will continue to accumulate. Right? In addition to that, cotton is what the most of them will be growing. Why? Because in the antebellum era prior to the Civil War, cotton made individuals wealthy. The South exported the majority of the world's cotton supply. You can see there the catalyst for why they were holding on to the institution of slavery so hard, but of course that's a different discussion. Nevertheless, the Union will blockade much of the South so that they can't get that cotton supply out and supplies such as war materials, right, ammunition, guns, and food supplies back in. There will be blockade runners, but overall, the cotton export from the South will substantially decrease during the Civil War. It's huge, right? As a result, manufacturing centers such as Britain will look elsewhere, and other regions will take the place for that cotton supply temporarily. Places such as Brazil, Egypt, India. After the Civil War, of course, cotton production will come back online in the South, partially because of the sharecropping institution. But now, not necessarily because you just have competitors such as Egypt or Brazil, but you will have a huge supply, a boom in the South as well. Of course, supply and demand, once you have a higher supply, too high of a supply, when supply exceeds demand, of course, what happens to the price goes down. Of course, many other factors as well, but that being one of them, long story short, the point here is that now at the end of the year, when they share that crop, not only do these individuals, these sharecroppers, not have a profit, they can't even pay their entire debt. So that debt will roll over to the next year. And by the way, my family still wants to eat. They still need supplies. And so I will continue to accumulate that debt. The cycle of poverty is definitely challenging. Of course, you say, Schlant, well, that's kind of interesting, but what does that really have to do with me? I'm going to be a business major, a nursing major. I'm going into education. I don't want to look at that in that much depth, right? Let me explain. Let me tell you how we can use this. One, of course, is why does any employer hire an employee? Because they feel as though you can add something to their company, to their organization, that presumably no one else can, which is why they hired you. And how do you add something? You use analysis. You use information and you use it so that you can uniquely come up with your own inferences, conclusions, and hopefully make whoever you're working for, make their organization better, improve it. Those are the skills you are learning, not just in a history course, but in any higher education course. And they will transcend those courses and you can employ them elsewhere. You say, Schlant, well, that's still academics, right? I mean, what is something really relatable? Simple. I would suggest that how many of our friends, our peers, yours and mine, how many of them, if they're not already in debt, will go into debt in their lifetime? And of course, what's the one course that we don't offer in higher education? Personal finance course. Yet if we're going to examine this material, and by the way, you're going to see stuff like this in every period we study. If we're going to look at that, let us make use of it. What did we just learn just from studying and examining that one period? Debt is always there. Debt is easy to get into, and debt is very challenging to get out of. Let us look at this information. Let us look at the material and create meaning. Essentially answer the question, why do you, do I, do we care? That is what I will ask of you this semester. I look forward to learning alongside with you. Thank you so much for your time.